It's so good to see you here. If you're a first-time a worshiper here today, we're so glad that you're here and you've joined us. For everybody else that's here each week, and you've been here before, welcome back. Today we're starting a brand new series, and the title of the series is Clean Out Your Junk Drawer. My wife and I have been in the ministry for almost 37 years. I started really young, so thank you. But we've been in the ministry for that long, and we've had the opportunity to move several times. You know, they would place us in different churches, and we would move there. We've been here almost 9 years, and in them moving us around, the denomination moving us around some, we've had the opportunity to learn how to pack and move. I hope I forget that now. I think I'm in the, I never want to move again unless y'all tote me out of here. Okay. But they, so when we would get ready to move, what we would do is we learned that if we would go into each room and if we'd spend some time in that room and pack up that room and then seal up those boxes and place on top of the boxes where those items, what room those items came from, when we got to where we were going, it would be real easy. We just place those boxes in those rooms, and it'd be easy to unpack. Great system, right? There's only one problem with that system. There's some stuff that does not go in really one particular room. And so the worst time that we would have packing was when we got down to the very end, and we're trying to figure out where all of this odds and ends stuff would go. And so we had a plan, and our plan was very simple. We would take all that odds and ends stuff, and we'd pack it into a box, seal up the box, and we would put 3 letters on top of the box. And those 3 letters are G-O-K. And G-O-K stood for God Only Knows. Because we weren't sure where it was going, and we were hoping he would help us out when we got there to figure out where all this was going. And the thing about the GOK boxes, they were always the last boxes we packed, but they were also the last boxes we unpacked, because they could stay packed for several weeks because we couldn't remember what was in them. And usually what would happen, the reason we would unpack those boxes is because we couldn't find something that we had been looking for. And so that prompted us to go dig out the GOK boxes and start opening them up and trying to find whatever it was that was lost. Well, the GOK boxes were filled with things that we just really didn't want to deal with at the time. They were filled up with things that we couldn't figure out where they were going to go, and we wondered how they got there anyway, and we'd seal them up and we'd put them away. We didn't want to deal with them then. We were going to deal with them later and just kind of push that on down the road. And once all the GOK boxes were finally emptied, we found another place to put things that we didn't want to deal with at the time, and it was called a junk drawer. Now, you might not want to admit it, and I get that, but I believe everybody has a junk drawer. Some have more than one. I'm not going to raise my hand. But everybody has these junk drawers, and what we do with our junk drawers is we take stuff that we just try to get it hid out of the way. We don't want to deal with it right now, and we stuff it in that drawer. And, whatever that object is, we want to just get it out of our sight, because when we can't see it, that means we don't have to deal with it, right? Out of sight, out of mind. And so we do that. And even my extreme OCD friends have a junk drawer. Now, my extreme OCD friends, their drawer is a lot better organized. It's arranged alphabetically. It's labeled, and it's placed in there by size, color, and category. But it's still a junk drawer. It's still stuff that you want to push off to the side and deal with some other time. You see, no matter if you just throw things in a junk drawer and hope that you can close it, or if you have it all neatly arranged and labeled and alphabetized, you just don't want to deal with it. See, in our lives, we've got everything in its place. We've got our family, we've got our job, we've got our hobbies, We got our bills. We got all these other things that are in place. We got our church life. We got our social life. We got our stuff we do with our friends. Everything is in place, and we've got it all packaged and ready to go in our different little areas. And all of these things, they have their place that they're supposed to fit into our lives, and we know how to deal with all of those things. And from the outside, we may look like we have it all together. But the reality is that too often we're putting on a good front to convince other people that we've got it all together. When the reality is that there are some things that we're really struggling with, and we really hope nobody finds out. Let me give you an example. It's Saturday. It's middle of the afternoon. You slept late that day. You've had a hard week. You were sitting around in your PJs, drinking a great big glass of sweet tea, watching Hallmark Christmas movies that you couldn't get to at Christmas. Just going to be a relaxing day. And then the phone rings. I mean, before the phone had rang, though, you'd started doing laundry and you'd had it all separated out on the laundry room floor, but you say, I'll do that later. You had dishes all in the sink that were left over from either that morning or maybe even the night before. You just didn't want to deal with it. You're just going to deal with it later because Saturday was going to be a chill day, right? And then the phone rings. And once the phone rings, it's a friend, an old friend you might not have seen for a while. They call you up and say, hey, we're passing through. We're 10 minutes away, and we're going to drop in and see you. And on the outside, you're going, that is great. We can't wait. And then you hang up, and you panic. You run, and in the 10 minutes before they get there, you run and you change clothes. You brush your teeth. Because you hadn't done that yet either. And once you brush your teeth, you make up the bed real quick. You go in there and you scoop up all the dirty clothes and just cram them into the dryer and the washing machine. You go into where all the dirty dishes are, and you start cramming them into the stove or the oven, and you cram them into the dishwasher, not getting them ready to wash, but you're getting them all out of sight. So by the time your friends gets there, they walk in there and they'll go, oh, your house is so clean. Oh, don't forget, you have to go light your bayberry or balsam and cedar or pumpkin spice Yankee candle, to cover up whatever smell happened to have been in there at that time. And you go and do all that. So they walk in, they get this fresh smelling candle. They see everything right in its place, but is that really right? Is everything in order? They think it is, but it's not. There's still dirty clothes. There's still dirty dishes. There's things you have to deal with you just didn't want to deal with right then. See, just because everything is hidden and smelling good doesn't mean everything is clean and in its place. See, what we do with the question we have to deal with is, what do we do with the stuff that we don't want to deal with? What do we do with the parts of our lives that are unpleasant and we don't want other people to see? See, I found out that we have what I call spiritual junk drawers. And in these spiritual junk drawers, we have these areas of our lives we don't want anybody else to see. There are things that need to be addressing that instead of addressing them, we stuff them down, we stuff them away and choose to ignore them. And see, the only way to get rid of your junk drawer is to clean it out, right? I mean, if you don't make the effort to clean out your junk drawer, you're always going to have a junk drawer. And the same is true with our spiritual junk drawers. There are some things we need to deal with, and there are some things in our lives we need to get rid of so that our lives will no longer be cluttered with useless junk, and so we can have more peace and joy. See, for the next few weeks, we're going to be dealing with some junk that's cluttering up our spiritual lives. And the things we're going to be looking at are not just annoying, they are also very harmful to ourselves and to other people. So I want to get started today cleaning out our junk drawer. And as I'm getting ready, I need to give you a disclaimer, okay? As I'm getting ready to talk about today's subject, I want to warn you that I'm going to say something in a few minutes that's very offensive. You just need to be aware of it. I know that something I am going to say is probably going to offend somebody, so I just want you to be prepared. Now, please, I don't want you to leave before you hear me out. So are you ready? Today, I'm going to talk about being offended. Now, I want to ask you something. Don't raise your hand or point to anybody, but how many of you were preparing to be offended before you knew what I was going to talk about? How many of you already were trying to figure out, okay, what's he going to say that's going to tick me off? You were trying to figure it out before you ever knew anything that I was going to say. See, we're living in a time when people are so easily offended about anything. I mean, it doesn't take much to set somebody off. If you don't believe that, just talk about politics. I mean, somebody's offended about politics, no matter what. People get offended when they're told no. People get offended. Have you ever had somebody get offended because you held the door open for them? I'm more afraid of my mama than I am of them. You know, my mama come back and get me today. People get offended if you call them sir or ma'am. I go back 2 generations. My grandmama would come and get me if I didn't do that. Nowadays, being called male or female can offend somebody. I mean, that's our only 2 choices, but they can get offended by it. I've been seeing that people being referred to by certain pronouns like he or she, they can get offended by that. As a matter of fact, some of the folks I've seen, they're in their profile on their either Facebook or Twitter, they'll put down, I prefer the pronoun they, them, or their, and not he or she. You can offend them if you call them he or she. I don't get this. People are offended by the song, Baby, It's Cold Outside. I mean, I don't get it. Exercising free speech offends people. Saying Merry Christmas offends people. Having a nativity scene on a government property offends people. Having a cross on a government property offends people. People get offended by what they think someone meant by what they said instead of what they actually said. You follow that? What do you think they meant by that? I don't know. They used their words. That's all I know what they meant by that. And then, I mean, the list is of being offended is just so long. There are people looking for a reason to be offended. Listen, there are some what I call empathetic offenders. And what I mean by that, some people get offended because other people are offended. Had nothing to do with them, but they're offended because somebody else got offended. See, I want us to look at that today. I want us to look at how we can start living life a different way. Listen, I'll just go ahead and give you this up front. You're going to have to work hard to offend me. I've dealt with this before. I get it. I mean, you know, you're going to have to work hard to offend me. But for some folks, you only have to breathe to offend them. So I want to invite us to look at what it means to be offended, and I look at being offended today in a different way. And you'll notice, I mean, y'all that have heard me preach, you know I usually have about, 4, 5, 6 points. Today I only have 2. So if you're following along in your notes, the first one is this. You need to understand that being offended is a trap Satan uses to harm us. It's a trap that Satan uses to harm us. I don't know how many of you read the book, The Bait of Satan by John Bevere. It's an excellent book, and I encourage you to read it and look at it. But John writes this about being offended. He said, in the New Testament, it often describes an entrapment used by the enemy. Offense is a tool of the devil to bring people into captivity. Paul instructed his young friend Timothy in these, and Paul writes this to his friend Timothy. He says, and a servant of the Lord must not quarrel, but be gentle to all, able to teach, patient, in humility, correcting those who are in opposition, if God perhaps will grant them repentance, so that they may know the truth, and that they may come to their senses and escape the snare or the entrapment of the devil, having been taken captive by him to do his will. You see, Bevere goes on to write, he said, those who are in quarrels or opposition fall into a trap and are held prisoner to do the devil's will. Even more alarming, they are unaware of their capacity. Like the prodigal, they must come to themselves by awaking to their true condition. They do not realize that they are spewing out bitter waters rather than pure. When a person is deceived, he believes he is right, even though not. It doesn't matter how many books you've read or how many hours you pray and study. If you are offended and in unforgiveness and refuse to repent of this sin, you have not come to the knowledge of truth, Bevere writes. You are deceived and you confuse others with your hypocritical lifestyle. No matter what the revelation, your fruit tells a different story. You'll become a spring spewing out bitter waters that will bring deception and not truth. When you rest in offense, you're not resting, first of all, and you're being trapped by Satan. Because if you are so worried about being offended, and if you are offended about all of this, I want you to think about the emotions you felt the last time you were offended. Some of you may be offended now. Think about the emotions you're feeling right now. When you think about that offense, how did it make you feel? Was joy or peace or hope anywhere in that? If you're honest with yourself, and if we're all honest with ourselves, the emotions and the feelings we had whenever we've been offended have been anger, bitterness, jealousy, envy, resentment, unforgiveness, desire for revenge, bearing a grudge. All of those things are things that we feel when we have been offended. Because let's face it, if somebody offends you, usually, you may be a lot better than I am at this, but if somebody does offend you, usually you want to lash out, don't you? I mean, that's what I want to do. I mean, y'all might have it a lot more together than I do. But when you do offend me, I want to get right back at you, just to be honest with you. I mean, that's reality. So my question is, with anger and bitterness and jealousy and envy and all of that, listen, when you choose to remain offended, then you're bearing rotten fruit. When you choose to remain offended, you're bearing rotten fruit. Anybody here like rotten fruit? You like biting into an apple and it's good and soft and mushy and bleh on the inside? I mean, you cannot bear good fruit when you choose to wallow in your offense. Let me tell you what Paul says about good fruit. In Galatians 5, he says this, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no law. Christ's followers are supposed to bear that kind of fruit. This is our list of fruit that we are supposed to bear if we're going to call ourselves Christ followers. This is what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be loving and patient and kind and long-suffering and good and faithful and gentle and have self-control and have joy and peace in our lives. Listen, Christ's followers are supposed to bear that kind of fruit. Did you notice that what you feel when you remain offended is nothing close to the fruit you're supposed to bear when you're not offended? So, well, Pastor Jimmy, Everyone else gets offended. They act out and they're bitter and they're angry and all of that. Why should we be different? Well, I'm glad you're asking me that question because I've got an answer for you today. Paul tells us again in Galatians, it goes on. He says, and those who are Christ's, those who belong to Christ have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, provoking one another, envying one another. In other words, if you are a Christ follower here, I'm talking to you. If you're not a Christ follower yet, just kind of hang out with us for a few minutes. But if you are a Christ follower, I'm talking directly to you today. You need to understand this, that God has called on you to be different than the world. He's called on you to be different than the world. Not to return to the world meanness for meanness. But He's called on you to be different from the world. He's called on me to be different from the world. Listen, we have given up the right to get revenge whenever we become a Christ follower. We might be working on the desire to get revenge, but we've given up the right. See, we are supposed to be different from those who don't follow Christ. And so because we're supposed to be different, we need to figure out how to break this trap that Satan has gotten for us. You need to hear this. You can break free of Satan's trap. You can break free of Satan's trap. Listen, at some point, we're all going to get offended. That's just the truth. And the reason we get offended is because we live in a fallen world around other people who are living in the same fallen world. There's sin in the world, and because there's sin, we're going to get offended. The question you have to answer is, do you wish to remain offended? You can remain offended or you can escape the offense. It's your choice. So the question we have to come to is, how do we do that? God loves us so much that He made a way for us to break the bondage of offense. I want to give you two different scenarios here real quick. If the person who offends you, if you're a Christ follower and the person who offends you is not a Christ follower, you are to go to that person and try to work it out. You're to try to talk it out. You're to try to get to the bottom of this. See, we're not supposed to try to get even. We're supposed to try to show them the love of Christ. Matter of fact, Paul spoke to that in the book of Romans. He said this, do not repay anyone evil for evil. That's pretty clear, isn't it? He says, be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, catch this next phrase, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take advantage, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Listen, just getting meaner and nastier to somebody who's been mean and nasty to you is not going to help. And did you catch that phrase? Inasmuch as you are able, you need to be at peace with all people. Listen, let's face it. Some folks don't want to be at peace with you. Let me help you out. That's their problem. That you cannot control them. If you think you can control somebody else, you're fooling yourself. Have you ever tried to control a 3-year-old? They're having a fit. I mean, you can hold them down long enough, but they're going to go to the end of their fit. You can't control anybody except you. You're the only one that you can control. So you work as hard as you can on your end to be at peace with everybody. Listen, Paul said, whenever you do that, you're going to heap burning coals on their head. That does not mean you're going to set their hair on fire. That does not mean you're going to treat them like a candle, start at the top and burn them all the way to the bottom. That's not what that means. You see, when Paul was talking about that, the people reading that would understand what he was talking about. He understood this old proverb. Carrying burning coals on your head was a symbol of repentance. And what Paul was saying is that we should treat those who harm us with kindness so that they will become ashamed and turn from their sins. That is our hope. And that is our goal, but it's also their choice. You can't force them to stop being mean. You can't force them to be at peace with you, but you can be at peace with them. Listen. While you cannot control what other people do, you can control what you do. And as Christ followers, we are to do all we can to be at peace with all people. Hear me out. That doesn't mean you have to trust them. That does not mean you have to hang out with them. That does not mean you have to go to the ball game with them. That does not mean they have to be in your social circle. That does not mean you have to do anything except let Christ love them through you. You don't have to keep putting yourself in a position to continually be hurt by them, but you need to be at peace. Whether or not they want to be at peace is their choice. You need to be at peace. The story is told that somebody came up to Robert E. Lee and said, General Lee, do you know this such and such general? And he said, yes, I do. He is a fine man. And he said, yeah, I know him. And he said, well, what do you think about him? And he said, well, he's a fine man. He's a great leader of men. He is a great general. And he said, but General Lee, do you know what he says about you? You know what he thinks about you? He doesn't like you. He thinks you're horrible. He thinks you're doing a horrible job. General Lee said, you asked me what I thought of him. You did not ask me what he thought of me. How you live your life is your choice. Are you going to be offended or not? Be at peace with all people inasmuch as you are able. That's how you deal with someone who's not a Christ follower. If you are a Christ follower, and if they are a Christ follower, and somebody has offended you, God has given us a detailed way to handle how to deal with that. See, He loves us so much. He wants us to figure this. He wants us to know how to figure this out. I've been preaching this for years, and I've been really preaching it. Talking about it. When somebody's talking about being having an offense with another Christ follower, and I said, well, around here we use the Matthew 18 approach. And some of them look at me like, who's Matthew? And is he just 18? He should be older than that. But I said, no, go to Matthew chapter 18. Listen to what it says. If your brother or sister sins, this is for other Christ followers, because you know what? Even though you're both Christ followers, you're both still human. He says this, Jesus says, if your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. If someone has offended you, go to that person. Go to that person. Don't go to your best friend unless they're the ones who have offended you. Don't go to the guys that you play golf with. Don't go to the ladies you're going to meet down at the beauty salon. Don't put some kind of passive-aggressive post on Facebook or some cryptic message on Instagram. Go to the person who has offended you or whom you have offended. Kind of a novel concept, wouldn't you think? It's been around a couple of thousand years. So if you're offended by someone, go to them. Sometimes they might not know they offended you. Sometimes they were intentional, let's be honest. But sometimes they might not even know. And you are being offended for something that they don't even know they offended you about. Go to them. Spend time with them. Talk with them. Try to work it out. We'll say, well, Pastor Jimmy, what happens if you can't work that out with them? Well, Jesus helps us with that too. In verse 16, he says this, but if they will not listen Take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. In other words, if you and that person cannot get it worked out, you get a couple of trusted people who are willing to work with you to help get this worked out. And then you go together. Y'all come together. Not somebody who's just going to be on your side, because the truth is you might be in the wrong too. But somebody who's going to sit down with both of you, and you can walk through it, you can talk through it, you can try to get it worked out. If it didn't work just one-on-one, you bring a couple of people with you, and you try to get it worked out. You're not ganging up on anybody. You're trying to restore the relationship. And then if that doesn't work, there's a third step. And the third step, Jesus talks about in verse 17. He says, if they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. This final step is to come before the church. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to come up and say, okay, you're offended by you, so y'all come on up here. Let's duke it out. We're going to raise the budget. Place your bets. You know, that's not what that means. We have a process here at the church, and if you need to bring it before more than 1 or 2 people, we'll help you do that to help bring reconciliation. It's not so I can get sermon illustrations, and it's not so that we can have gossip going around, because that's not what the purpose of it is. But you come before a body of believers for the purpose of reconciliation. See, it's been my experience that Christ's followers who truly want to be reconciled will have that happen before they need to come in front of the church. Anita and I had a lot of fun Christmas shopping. We always do. And we enjoy going out and purchasing items, especially for the grandkids. And I've told my wife for many years that I haven't met a boy yet that likes to open clothes, I'm still there, okay? So when we were out shopping, I found this. And this is a little thing called Tiny Pong. Has anybody ever played with Tiny Pong before? Well, it's a very simple little concept. And this little Tiny Pong thing, I was watching with my grandsons. They were watching Dude Perfect. Anybody ever watched Dude Perfect? They're trick shot people. And my grandsons, we were watching all that. And they had a little contest. And it's a very simple little contest. All you do is you just drop it. Thank you. I'm very good at this. I bought this because I figured we could have some fun with this when the family's together. We could enjoy ourselves. So I got this out and got it all ready around Christmas time and brought it in there. And I had to step out of the room for a few minutes. And we're going to kind of take turns and everybody's going to play this game. And so it's really a very simple concept. You push a little button down here. You put the little ball on there. You pull the trigger. Whenever you pull the trigger, it bounces the ball up. And you just keep going back and forth and back and forth. See who can get the most points. And you don't even have to keep score. It keeps score for you. And it's happy to announce the high score once somebody has achieved it. So, it's a very simple little concept. So I walk out of the room, let them play, and I come back in. And whenever I come back in, I find out that the high score at that moment was 42. I'm thinking, well, I'm pretty coordinated. He's 8. I got him by 48 years. I got this. So I get it, and then I decide to try it. And we see how well that worked. And that's about as well as I got. As a matter of fact, I've been fooling with this thing, and on that day, I couldn't get to 6. And the high score was 42. And I'm thinking, what in the world? How did you get to 42? And then I found out how he got to 42. You can get all the way to 42 doing that. Matter of fact, you can get to 43. I'm not going to say how I know that. You see, this game, I was watching the Dude Perfect guys do it, and one guy did it 50 times, and the other guy did it 300 times. I'm figuring I can do it. And so this game takes some time and some practice to get good at. It takes a little coordination, which I found out I'm less coordinated than I thought I was. You have to go through it. You have to practice with it. You're going to make some mistakes. You're going to drop the ball. But if you hang in there with it, you can get a lot better at it. You see, the same holds true when you're trying to overcome an offense. It's not easy. It probably is not going to be pleasant. It's not going to be something that you're just going to be able to rush through and get to the end of. You see, it's going to take some time. It's going to take some effort. But the longer you work at it, the less prone to being offended you will be. See, if you are not willing to put in the hard work, you're going to fall prey to the offense, and you're going to become angry and bitter and resentful. The other thing you need to know is you're setting an example for other people. Barrett, one of my 3-year-old grandbabies, was at the house yesterday, and he was out playing with this. And he was doing his best to work it. And you know how he started working it? The same way he saw his 8-year-old cousin work it. It's amazing how you can do it when you're cheating. You see, Barrett didn't know the rules. He's 3. He was doing what he saw somebody else do. See, we're talking about cleaning out our junk drawer. We don't need to just rearrange the stuff that's in there. We need to get rid of some stuff. We need to throw it away. We need to get it away from us. And the first thing I want us to look at, the first thing I want us to think about, the first thing I want us to pray about is how we worry about being offended, or how we're offended right now, or how we're dealing with offense that comes in our life. How are we going to deal with that? Are we willing to put in the time and the hard work and the practice and constantly working at it in order to get better at it? Are we willing to give God our attention and ask God to help us get through the offense? See, let's face it, there's some folks who are just too happy to be mad. What I mean by that is they're glad to be mad. I mean, they want to be mad, and they're going to find a reason to be mad. Don't be like them. Being offended is not what God put you here on this planet for. I want to ask you something. Have you ever thought about how much we have offended God? Have you ever thought about how much we have said to God, hey, I know you've told us not to do this, but God, we know better than you do because we're here and, we're kind of walking around on this planet and we got it. I mean, after all, this is 2020 now. We have better vision. It's going to take a minute. All right. And we know how to live our lives better than you know how we're supposed to live our lives. And what you have said in your Bible, those are just suggestions, right? I mean, they're not the 10 Commandments, they're the 10 suggestions. Listen, every time we sin, we offend God. Every time we sin, we offend God. And do you know how God treats us? He forgives us. And He loves us. And He reminds us that He sent His Son to die for us. The very people who put the nails through the hands and feet of Jesus and hung Him on that cross and beat Him before they put Him up there and mistreated Him and lied about Him and accused Him falsely and did everything they could to destroy Him. Those same people are people that He died for. And He died for you. You might not have put a nail through His hand. You might not have put a strap across His back. But He died for you. So are you easily offended? Have you been holding on to an offense for a while and allowing it to continue to breed anger and resentment and bitterness? Are you more concerned about keeping this facade that you have it all together? Or are you willing to do the work to be healed of your offense? Isn't it time you started cleaning out your junk drawer? I know it's time I started cleaning out mine.